When it comes to the World Wide Web that we all call the internet, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You're either thinking one of three things right now. You're either A, thinking of the many different online celebrities that's graced it over the years, B, the multitude of different social medias that exist on the internet like Reddit, Facebook, and the one you're on right now, YouTube, or C, the ungodly amount of memes that have been spread across billions of screens around the world. Out of everything I just mentioned, memes are probably the oldest things that have ever existed on the internet, and they've basically grown alongside it, and one of the earliest forms of memes to exist throughout the web are cat memes. Cat memes and videos are a special case on the internet due to the fact that they kinda just never go away. They're always going to be present on the internet no matter what you do. But I know that a lot of you are wondering why I'm starting the video off by talking about cats, and the reason why is the surprising lack of them in Skylands. Now, before you say that Tessa is a cat, she's actually a fox according to the wiki, along with the many citizens that we see in Woodburrow. And if the feline section of the wiki has all of the cats of Skylands documented, that means that all of the felines that we see in-game are exclusive to the Skylanders, which I think is the only time that that has happened in the franchise, and there's surprisingly a small amount of them too. According to the wiki, there's only 8 Skylanders related to cats, and 2 of them are actually alternate variants, meaning that there's only 6 Skylanders to talk about. But things get weird when you realize that cat Skylanders weren't even brought into the franchise until SWAT Force. That's 2 games where cats aren't even mentioned. So today, we're going to take a look at 3 of these cats and see what we can find. But with that out the way, let's get started. When it comes to all the feline Skylanders, Scratch has to be one of the most intriguing out of all of them, which makes her even better since she's the first to ever exist. So I did some digging into her development and I learned some pretty interesting stuff. According to the development section of her wiki, Scratch's alternate concepts didn't have the mask at all, which is a pretty big staple of her character, and she would be holding either a dagger or a magical scepter with her tail. She would also be wearing a headdress along with blue clawed and jeweled gloves, which I'm kinda glad that they replaced with a mask and claws. It just makes her stand out more as a character in my opinion. But with that all said and done, let's take a look at her lore. Scratch was born in a city of crystals and gold on the peak of a mountain called Cat Eye, the city only accessible to creatures of the air element, and as she grew older, she gained a love of soaring around the mountain and exploring the many gemstone mines around the city, usually losing track of time and spending days on end in the caves investigating every nook and cranny of it. But this idyllic life of exploration and serenity would abruptly come to an end. One day, a group of Greeble pirates would invade the city with a fleet of warships, intending to steal the magical gems that resided deep within the mountain. And knowing the threat that they posed, she would don her golden armor and claws before rushing off to stop the Greebles in their tracks. She would lead the forces of the city against the Greebles, and they would do battle for days on end. And even though she was fast and powerful enough to tackle a ton of Greebles, she would slowly be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of pirates coming down on the city. And at that moment, she would realize something. The Greebles' airships were built around enormous air balloons, so maybe if she popped them, the entire ship would plummet to the ground. So she quickly got to work on popping all of the balloons that were holding up the ships, and soon after, every ship had plummeted down towards the earth. From that day to the present, no Greeble would try to invade the Shining City or Cat Eye Mountain ever again. But her heroic deeds would not be forgotten. Even though Eon somehow didn't hear about this, Jetvac would, and he would bring her into the Skylanders, where she would go on to make an appearance in Stump Smash vs. the Bone Dragon and Ripped into Overdrive. Now, I'd like to say that this is a story that is up there with a lot of the other ones I've covered. I honestly don't know what it is, but I've just grown to enjoy this one more than a lot of the others. But there's a few things that I want to talk about when it comes to this story specifically. The thing that I noticed the most is the fact that this battle went on for days and involved an actual army that came from a city no less. Most of the time, a Skylander would just steamroll through the antagonists of their story, but this one feels a little more realistic. Especially considering the fact that she actually has help, and instead of just being a random soldier, she's the reason that the tide turned in their favor. And speaking of the city's forces, a lot of you might be wondering why she led them in the first place. I think that she holds some sort of high position in the city's guard because she has her own personal armor, but I also could be wrong as it isn't directly stated in the story. Another thing that I want to point out is how big the Greebles' force was. We know about the Minions Monthly stuff involved with them, so someone bought so many Greebles that they were literally able to fight for days. That means that someone paid this absolutely insane amount of greebles to steal these crystals, and somehow got them up there without the greebles being part of the air element. And I suspect that it was either Chaos or Count Moneybone, because these two are probably the only people in Skylands who could have a reason to do this with the funds to support it. Now, this could potentially be a rogue faction of greebles, but once again, I'm not exactly sure, since most of the time we've seen the greebles in canon, they're working under someone, even the pirates. But with that out the way, let's get into the next Skylander of today. And I know that a lot of you are going to be pretty excited for this one.
Keeping it cool.
Now, at first glance, Freezeblade looks like your average Skylander that just so happens to be part of the SWAT force, but the more that I dug up about him, the more I learned how fascinating he is outside of Skylanders. Freezeblade was first conceived as a blue Kangarat with a tail made of ice, which might have been the inspiration for the evilized Kangarats we see throughout the game. But he also has a multitude of alternate variants as well, depicting him with either a unicorn horn, a scarf, or even a mage-like hood. This kinda implies to me at least that him being a cat was kinda tacked on due to how extremely varied his concepts were. But what's even more interesting is who voices him. If the wiki is correct, Freezeblade is voice acted by Billy West, who not only plays a crap ton of roles, but one of his major roles was Fry on Futurama, which is kinda insane that Skylanders has attracted this many talented voice actors. But with that out the way, let's take a look at his backstory and see how he ended up on the SWAT force. Freezeblade was born in the frozen wastelands of Vesh, and as he grew up there, a love of skating grew alongside him. But one day, when he was still in his youth, his life would be completely uprooted when he and his family moved to the Great Lava Lakes. And for Freezeblade, it was a extremely difficult adjustment. Not only was he the only one of his kind, but the lava lakes were extremely hot, making it nearly impossible for him to skate there. But as he grew older, he would slowly adjust to his new surroundings until one day, he learned an inherent magical ability that would change his life for the better. He had learned that he could skate on literally any surface, including lava. But one day, while he was trying to set a new frozen lava speed record, he would stumble upon Blast Zone, who was currently fighting off a Spellpunk ambush. Freezeblade would quickly hop into the fray and defend him, and from there, the two would work together to beat the Spellpunks back. And Blast Zone was so impressed with his skill that he would invite Freezeblade into the Skylanders, and the two would go on to work together in the SWAT force. Now, there's one thing that immediately stuck out to me in the story, and that's Freezeblade being the only one of his kind in the Great Lava Lakes, which makes me wonder if his parents just adopted him after he was born. It would make that part of the wiki make a little more sense, but I think it's trying to say that he was the only child there. And speaking about the move, I kinda wonder why they even moved to the lava lakes in the first place, as it isn't explained in the wiki. But with that out the way, let's get into the last Skylander of today.
The master of mystery.
When it comes to Mystic Cat, he's a really interesting character, not only because he's the last cat-inspired Skylander to ever be made, but he's also a Sphinx. If you don't know what that is, a Sphinx is a mythical creature that has the head of a human, the body of a lion, and the wings of an eagle. But when it comes to Mystic Cat, he has the torso and arms of a human and is missing the wings. This is kind of one of those mythical creatures that throw me for a loop a bit because I've seen like 3 different versions of a Sphinx and I don't know which one he's specifically supposed to be. But for now, let's take a look at his backstory and see what's going on here. For centuries, Mystic Cat and the rest of the Sphinxes guarded the entrance to a location known as the Ancient Desert, and the way that the Guild of Sphinxes guarded the sacred land was through riddles. The process was simple. If a person could correctly answer the riddles that the Sphinxes gave out, they would be permitted to enter. And since only a few people could answer all of the riddles, it worked out somewhat well. But for one of these Sphinxes, a question would begin to bubble up to the surface. Mystic Cat was already a curious creature in his own right, and a question that not even he could answer would linger in the front of his mind. How come the magical desert was only permitted to those who could answer difficult riddles, and why were so many people so desperate to get inside of it? And this curiosity would lead him to venture into the desert on his own. When he entered the desert, he would be attacked by wandering gypsies and sand raiders that scoured the desert for lost treasure, and after fighting off bandit after bandit with his sorcery skills, he would leave the desert with more questions than answers. When he told the elders about his encounters, they would explain to him that the true nature of the desert was to reveal one's identity to them. and that his was to protect all of Skylands. After this revelation, the Sphinxes would invite Eon to the desert to see if their destinies intertwined, and once Eon emerged from the desert the next day, he knew that Mysticat would be one of his greatest senseis, and that one day, he would shave his beard. And even though he kept that one to himself, Mysticat would go on to fulfill his destiny and become a sensei of the sorcerer class. Now, when it comes to the story, it's up there with a lot of the other ones that I've read, and the only thing that really stands out to me is that the Sphinxes summoned Eon. It kind of implies to me that the Sphinxes either had relations with Eon beforehand, since he went into the desert alone without question, or if they have more authority than he does. I know it's really far-fetched, but it's always interesting to speculate on higher beings within the Skylanders universe since we've only seen a few of them, and there's likely a lot more. But with that out the way, I think that this is a good cutoff point for this video. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, and I will see you all in the next one.